Robson again, getting it back from Stapleton. He's on his way. Can he find the shot? Brilliant goal!
Cantona making the early run. Here he is! Lovely goal! Lovely goal!
Oh, fantastic skill from the Argentinian international. Still Redondo. It's Raul. They are walking away with it. Greenhoff is far post. Jimmy Greenhoff!
Missed again. What a player this boy is. He's got another.
Hi and welcome to United Rewind, the podcast that revisits classic and sometimes not so classic United matches. I'm Rob Smythe and with me as always is Daniel Harris. And this week, in honour of the former United manager Tommy Docherty, who died on New Year's Eve, we're going to go back to 1977 and the treble busting FA Cup final win over Liverpool. You alright this week, Daniel?
As alright as one can be. I mean, I feel like we have experienced better times than these.
We have, on the plus side, at the time of recording this, Manchester United could be about to go top of the Premier League. Obviously, by the time you hear it, you'll know. How has this happened?
That is a good question. I mean, it's incredible because they have a manager who doesn't know what he's doing. I mean, if the Premier League measured ability to climb rope or play bench ball, you would understand. But otherwise, it is difficult to grasp.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully. We were talking about this earlier that, you know, it wouldn't shock anyone if they had a little bit of a shambles at Burnley, but you'll hope they'll win and go to Anfield as league leaders. That's like a proper humdinger, isn't it? I was trying to think the last time there was such an important Liverpool United game. Probably go back 2009, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, it's a strange situation with United because they do really need to put one over on Liverpool.
Yes.
For not just for them really, but for everyone in the league. That
Yeah,
Liverpool need. They're looking much more vulnerable than they have at any time. But that home record needs to be taken care of. Although in terms of actually challenging for the league, I think that a draw would be okay for United if they win tonight because Liverpool have a difficult run coming up and United have a fairly all right run coming up.
Yeah, they do. I agree with you about that. I think someone needs to undermine Liverpool because you would think they can't keep going on playing silly buggers away from home. So if they improve their away form and their home form stays as formidable as it has been against anyone other than Big Sam, then you would still fancy them. But I mean, if there's a team built to win at Anfield, it is United, isn't it?
Yeah, they're looking in a good position. I mean, I think they'll need to play slightly differently to how they played at City, which in some ways was quite a mature performance in that City played well and United defended well and stayed in the game. Like they weren't outclassed and they weren't even really outplayed. They did lose to a team that played better, but that's different from being outplayed. But in other ways, it was quite an immature performance because they still managed to concede 2 goals from set pieces. And I think particularly when they were going forward, when you play Guardiola teams, you've got to be patient because they're going to have a lot of the ball. And if you don't score early or if they play well, then you have to wait. And when United got the ball forward, it felt like every time they got into a slightly decent position, they tried something overly ambitious, a killer pass or a shot. And that's not the way to do it. Like they snatched at things still. And I think that if they do that against Liverpool, then they'll struggle. But against Liverpool, they're playing against a team that feels strange to say this, but doesn't defend as well as City. And City,
No.
they're in a strange situation now because they're not as good as the teams that won leagues. But on the other hand, if you have Guardiola's attackers and just sensible defending taking place, then City are a big threat to anyone.
Yeah, no, I agree about the League Cup semi. There was a desperation, was there? Particularly, that was why it was so annoying to concede such a cheap first goal because the first goal was always going to set the tone for that game, particularly after the stalemate in the league. And it was just such a crap. And Bruno Fernandes, I thought, was probably had his worst game for United. He looked really mentally tired. The best thing about him actually is that he's always looking for a killer pass, but he kind of, even by his standards, he overdid it. I thought like his decision making, never mind the execution, were really poor. So I was glad he got a rest against Watford anyway.
Yeah, he looked. That's exactly what you. I agree with what you say that he didn't just look physically spent like he did towards the end of last season. He looked frustrated, making bad decisions, which isn't something you usually associate with him. And I would have not had him on the bench at all at the weekend because I don't think it's just about him not having to charge about for 90 minutes. It's about him not having a time when he doesn't have to prepare to play, when he doesn't have to warm up, when he doesn't have to go through that routine, when he can just sit at home taking photos of himself for Instagram, whatever it is that he does. And I'd love to see him on the bench tonight as well. Like I think I'd be playing Pogba and Van der Beek tonight so that he could have a rest, but there's not a chance that's going to happen.
No, agreed.
I apologise, by the way. It sounds like there's some kind of drone or helicopter gunship outside my window, if anyone's wondering what the noise is. Just as the pollarding and coppicing just stopped, there's now some kind of humongous airship Zeppelin affair outside my window. If that's bothering anyone, that's what it is. Actually reminds me of cup finals past, and I grew up not far from Wembley, and there'd be those kind of Zeppelins over the stadium, which was kind of over where I lived as well at the weekend, which sort of always reminded me of cup finals. So now when I see them, I always feel like it's like those things that remind you of good memories, where you feel like, oh, is there a cup final coming?
Okay, let's get into this week's match. The epic 2-1 FA Cup final win over Liverpool at Wembley on the 21st of May, 1977. And the backstory, I guess, is all about the year before.
Yeah, I mean, Docherty promised United fans that they'd be back to win it after losing to Southampton. And that Southampton game is one that anyone that was old enough to have been around for that game still feels pain at the experience of. Like, if you ever mention the people that I know from the game, if you ever mentioned Bobby Stokes, it would immediately be offside. And I guess where United were at that time, in some ways, is not dissimilar to where United are now, where they look like a coming team. But instead of having to play a serious team in the final, they played a team who were in the division below, and yet somehow contrived to get beaten.
Yeah, it was a very nervous performance, wasn't it? Which was really odd, and that must have put so much pressure on them going into this game. I mean, all season really it was about the FA Cup, wasn't it? They beat Southampton on the way to the final, had a really good win over Leeds. But actually, I was reading Richard Kurtz's book, The Red Army Years, which I can't recommend highly enough. It's a brilliant book about United in the 70s, on and off the field, and he was saying that basically they almost threw the league from March. They weren't a million miles away from. I think Ipswich were leading, and Liverpool went on to win it. But actually, any kind of half hint of an injury and people were rested because it became all about the FA Cup and making up for the year before.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of locates the FA Cup as that seminal moment in a season and the role that it played in British culture at the time, which I think goes all the way back to the Matthews Cup final, because what you had the Matthews Cup final was you had TV was just becoming something that people had. And then you had the coronation that summer, and everyone was buying TVs for the coronation. So what they did was they all bought their TVs just a month earlier to see Stanley Matthews, who was footballing royalty, hopefully win his FA Cup medal, because everyone was supporting Stanley Matthews, who sort of represented one aspect of what Britishness was about at the time, this kind of perceived moral rectitude and dignity and quietness that was one side. On the other side, you had the Blackpool fans who represented Music Hall and the Pleasure Beach and this kind of British eccentric. And those two things kind of came together at just the right moment when people started to have a few more pounds in their pocket, rationing was over, and everyone started to buy TVs. And what you had was everyone tuning in together, like whether they were like in families or watching TVs in public spaces. And before the game, you had this whole session of public singing, like Knees Up Mother Brown, and I've got a lovely bunch of coconuts, and people singing one after the other. And it sort of took over as football took over from cricket and became this secular religion. And what you end up with is this huge showpiece final like United against Liverpool that is actually more important than a lot of other things that are really more important.
Yeah, a couple of things. It's a really good point. A couple of things struck me about the coverage, actually, is how often Brian Moore on ITV referred to it as the Jubilee Cup final, which clearly must have been a big thing at the time. The other thing that's interesting is the first major cup final between Liverpool and United, which it didn't surprise me, but it just to kind of, the more you dwell on that, the more you think it kind of reflects where the rivalry was at. I guess it would become, because this game was played in a really good spirit generally, the rivalry would become obviously incredibly vicious within a few years, but there was not really much of that here.
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, the Red Army years, and he says, to me, that was the age of innocence, his last cup final. And we'll talk about it a little bit more at the end, I think. But yeah, United and Liverpool didn't quite hate each other at that point because the rivalry hadn't had a chance to build. And Busby and Shankly were both great men and great friends. And I think there was still, like, you obviously had the rivalry to do with nothing. There was nothing to do with football, like the opening of the ship canal and the kind of rivalry between the cities economically. But yeah, the football hadn't quite got poisonous yet. And
it's worth explaining the context. So United had finished sixth, I think. They had two really dodgy, but they had a terrible 2-month period where they didn't win a game from October to December, and they were always kind of playing catch up after that. then they sort of faded towards the end of the season as the cup became a priority. Liverpool won the league and were also playing in the European Cup final 3 or 4 days after this game. So they were on for the treble, or as some papers described it, the triple crown. So that's one thing I like about this game, that obviously it existed in the moment and it was an incredible win for United, but actually even 22 years later, it kind of had a new sheen added to it.
Yeah, you mentioned Brian Moore before, and so I was looking at the TV listings, and they had a little panel on the cup final with quotations, and it goes, "The exec producer of ITV says, we have got the most experienced commentator in Brian Moore. This will be his 15th cup final. In a match of this sort, experience has got to be a big plus." As though he was playing. And then it carries on to say, the BBC commentator is John Motson, doing his first cup final, though at 31 he had the experience of international matches and match of the day. And it's just, you didn't realise that they took it so seriously at that point. It almost, because it feels like the self-importance of football is quite a new invention, but no, in fact, there it is.
Just before we talk about the game itself, there's a couple of quite amusing stories about fake tickets that were in the papers. So the first one, from The Guardian, a man who placed advertisements in a national newspaper offering cup final seats, in quote marks, for £15 sent applicants small canvas stools with cup final written on them. Marlborough Street Court, London, heard yesterday. David Wilkins, who is unemployed, was sent in custody for sentence, blah, 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 blah. Apparently he earned 415 quid. Sent seats. I mean, what the...
Stalls? No, stalls with cup final on. I think how are we understanding the word stalls here? That has...
Oh, no, don't. No. And there was there's a piece in the Observer talking about 57 arrests, and actually it wasn't really, most of it was for arguments over supporters who had forged tickets who couldn't get in. And there's one that says, a bellicose Liverpudlian wearing a Tommy Smith's Pretty and Sophia Loren badge was turned back with a ticket he had bought for 40 quid in a Merseyside pub. Chief Inspector David Vaness, leading 15 detectives trying to trace the origin of the forgery, said, "These are very good forgeries indeed."
You praise indeed. You'd have
Yeah,
took
exactly.
it.
Yeah, exactly.
But one of the things that talking of people getting into cup finals reminded me of was in the 80s, it was quite a popular kids party, was to go on a tour of Wembley Stadium. And you kind of went around the stadium, like looked at the bath, like the plunge baths and stuff. And then at the end, you got to climb the 32 steps or however many it was and lift a trophy while they piped noise in. And there was always a story that they would tell you where there was they showed a picture of the players in the tunnel before the game, and there are these two huge doors at the back of the tunnel. And they used to tell this yarn that one day some bloke turned up and said, "I'm delivering the milk for the Queen's tea." And they realised that the Queen wasn't coming to this game. The Queen, as far as I know, the Queen attended that Matthews Cup final, like one of the greatest matches of football ever played, and decided that actually she didn't like football. although her relatives seem to have somehow inherited her luck in the ballot to always win the best seats. But anyway, they realised the Queen wasn't coming, and they told you with pride, instead of saying, "Good blag, just come on, come in," they were able to then shut the doors and tell the bloke to do one. But I also looked at, like, the BBC Genome Project has the kind of programs of old listings, and so I had a look at. It's got the whole listing for this cup final. So it says, BBC outside broadcast cameras bring you the whole of this great occasion with slow motion replays of the game's outstanding moments and interviews with the players. So one of the highlights, one of the things I've bolded was Frank Boff sets the scene inside. I mean, truly the mind boggles at a scene set from Frank Boff. Of various famous scandal. Then at cup final, it's a knockout. The excitement of it's a knockout as teams from the supporters clubs of Liverpool and Manchester United compete in this traditional cup final contest. Joining in are past and present players and celebrity supporters, introduced by Eddie Waring and Stuart Hall referee Arthur Ellis.
Yeah,
It kind of gives it a level of seriousness. Referee Arthur Ellis. I mean, it's interesting because it does remind you of what the cup final used to be, and it's become a cliche to say, "Oh, it was this whole day." But I mean, I wasn't even born in 1977, but it was this whole day of football extravaganza, the like of which you just didn't get at any other point.
It's so hard to convey that, isn't it? On the off chance we have any listeners under 30, it's really hard to convey that. I suppose there are so many things. There was such glamour with the FA Cup, and I mean, for a while it was kind of touch and go as to what was better to win, certainly in terms of the moment. And I guess it's just also there was no live football, was there? So it really was, apart from World Cups, obviously. So it's just almost a yearly event.
And it's back to that secular religion thing.
Yeah.
It has its own rhythms and things that keep recurring in the same way that you get at prayer. So, for example, the cup inside Wembley, 135 inside Wembley, the cup final atmosphere mounts as the teams go out to inspect the Wembley pitch. People looking at grass.
What was your favourite growing up? What was your favourite bit of that long FA Cup preamble?
Meet the teams.
too.
Someone introducing the teammates. How many players in each team are called Trigger?
Do you know? Guess who did United's in '96? I don't know why this has stayed with me. Only because it's probably quite unlikely.
It wasn't. I mean, the most unlikely I can think of is Paul Scholes.
It was not quite.
It was Ryan Giggs.
It was Nicky Butt. At least I think it was. Unless
I think that is on. I think that's on YouTube.
Yeah, that's probably
Nicky Butt's actually quite a funny guy. I mean, one of my all-time favourite United anecdotes. I think I've sort of got sold to the papers. One of my mates was at one of these talks, and it's the one where Sheringham told the story, but Nicky Butt's drinking a cup of tea of a morning, and he takes the spoon out of the tea, and he places it on Peter Schmeichel's scrotum.
Oh, and Schmeichel was chasing him around the dressing room.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
Swingers swinging.
Yeah.
And then they also had the other thing. Sorry, after they had people looking at grass, goal of the season, see the winning goals and find out who has won £200 of premium bonds in this popular annual competition.
200 quid of premium bonds. That's tremendous. There are so many lovely little details like that, and even little things like that huge R when they show a replay, just in case you weren't sure. It's so brilliant. It's so of its time. You made a point, actually. You kind of think the 70s were normal, but actually there are so many little things you think, what the hell? And I would just quickly, before we get into the action, one of them is that had this gone to a replay, the game was on the 21st of May, the replay would have been played on the 25th of June. What the hell?
I mean, who knows what was going on in between times?
I did a double take and thought it might have been a cock-up, but I looked into it, and the reason is, so Liverpool had the midweek European Cup final, then it was a home international championship, then England had a tour of South America. So after all that, they might have had to come home and play an FA Cup final replay over a month after the original game. Incredible.
Yeah, it's almost coronavirus situation where time makes absolutely no sense anymore.
Yeah, UEFA would have loved it with the gap they have between first and second legs in the round of 16.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a good improvement that they're playing, that in theory, that you would want to play the games as close together as possible. There's a good improvement to be had there. But rather than splitting them I understand why you would want to watch more games on television as well. I mean, there's something quite nice about that. But I would say, like, they had it a couple of seasons ago where they would play the games basically in consecutive weeks, which I think is a good way of doing it.
I quite like a fortnight, but I don't feel strongly.
Back to United, actually. Like, it's interesting, the Tommy Docherty situation, because when we made Busby, we obviously interviewed a lot of the players from the time, and we weren't mainly asking them about this time, but we strayed there. And Paddy Crerand said this about Tommy Docherty. I mean, I should add that there is significant animus between Paddy and the Doc, as there is between Willie Morgan and the Doc as well. Not everyone loved the Doc. So what Paddy said was, Tommy Docherty had an attitude of playing defensive football, and I became his assistant. And at that particular time, and this is true whether people will believe it or not, I'm up the stairs with him in the big director's room up there, and we're talking about football. I'm saying to Tommy, you've got to play attacking football. You can't play football defensively at Old Trafford. Manchester United never been brought up on for that kind of football. It's got to be attacking. And Matt came up the stairs at that particular time, and he walked, and I shouldn't have done it. I says to Tommy, when Matt was manager, it was all about attacking, and that's what the crowd loved. And Matt interrupted and said, yes, that's what the crowd loved, attacking football, looking at Tommy Docherty, but never said anything else and walked away. So, I mean, it is interesting that the Doc's team were obviously maybe the most cavalier of all United teams, but maybe the Doc didn't actually intend for that to be the case in the beginning.
That's really interesting. I'd not heard that at all before. Because it's hard to know the team that went down. Obviously, it's hard to know were they defensive or were they just shit. It's really hard to know. But once they went into Division 2, certainly they were incredibly attacking, weren't they?
Yeah, they were. But
then obviously you would be in that division. Yeah, that's really. I'd love to know more about that.
It's fair to say that the Doc's team were a proper United team. I mean, and it's really interesting also what it says about Samat, that all he said, he didn't properly address the issue or address Docherty. He just made a statement and then, like God, and then left Docherty to do the exegesis.
So basically, Samat was Livia Soprano and Tommy Docherty was Junior.
Exactly that. The other thing I thought of was Talleyrand, the French diplomat, and when he died, Metternich said, "I wonder what he meant by that." So the other thing to say about the form was that Liverpool had beaten United 1-0 at Anfield, and the game at Old Trafford had been a draw. So 0-0 draw. So I guess the matchup was quite a tight one.
Yes, it was seen as like a real study in contrast, wasn't it? Like you say, United's cavalier attacking team. Liverpool were very attritional and kind of almost put you to sleep. And there was a lot of talk actually in the previews about how United had to get a fast start. Basically, if they weren't I remember one of the previews saying even if they're 2-0 up at half time, they should be wary. And there was so much talk about that, about Liverpool just slowly grinding them down.
It's a bit like when cricketers say the first hour is crucial.
Yeah, exactly. But actually,
and perhaps the second hour and the third hour. But yeah, I mean, I know what you're saying. You would thought that you would expect it's much harder for a young team to come from behind. I mean, I feel that about this United as well. Like, I've always felt that the current version of United could do something this season, but I was concerned after they started the way they started, because you usually feel that the coming team have to win it from the front. Yeah. That if they fall behind, they're not going to have the nous or not the desire, that's the wrong word, or the belief to be able to think that they can do it from the behind. And also, the team that has won before, if they get a lead, you would think that it's going to be very hard to catch you. I mean, I guess 06-07 is a really good example of that. But we're seeing it now. And I mean, the doc said apparently before the game, he said to the players, he believes he's got the best 12 players, now go out and perform. And I think all the best United teams didn't really overcomplicate things.
I think that's very true. Maybe 07-08 up to a point, but there was still a lot of off-the-cuff attacking, wasn't there?
Yeah, the defense was rehearsed. There was structure to the defending, and when the ball's here, this is where you need to be, because that's what defending is. Defending's about standing up, and it's about organisation, and it's about working as a team and on shape. But attacking is much less so than that. I mean, you can rehearse certain moves, and I mean, United do it, much as people say they don't. After they scored that brilliant goal against Newcastle on the break, the one that Bruno scored, he literally said, "We've rehearsed this in training," for people to say they don't do that. But yeah, United's best teams have all been quite off the cuff in an attacking sense, I think.
So before we actually start discussing the action, let's remind ourselves what happened.
Hughes with a header. Keegan with a header. Off McElroy. Oh, and Pearson put through by Greenhoff. Jones is after him. Pearson shot, goal! Out of nothing. McElroy's header.
Just a ball that was allowed to bounce and wasn't dealt with positively.
Greenhoff's header. And a whiplash shot by Stuart Pearson. Now it's McDermott. And instead of the treble, can it possibly be trouble? Highway. McDermott back for Joey Jones. Too high for Keegan, but Case is there. The shot by Case, a goal! 1-1. What an answer! Stepney prostrate. Liverpool celebrate. McElroy to Nicol. And now to Koppel. Hughes with the leap, but he's beaten in the air. Greenhoff trying to get in behind Tommy Smith and might succeed in doing so. And the ball's in the net. And it's got to be gone to Jimmy Greenhoff, although Macari and Hill are there to claim it too. Another look at the watch. And Liverpool's treble is going to be beyond them. Kennedy again, unless they can do something with this cross. Keegan lifting himself, and it's over. Stepney falls to the ground in his goal mouth. Augustin was in the goal. Hugging of the brothers. And the golden dream of a treble for Liverpool has been shattered. And the team that came here and had humble pie last year have come back this time to celebrate.
It was a belting atmosphere, wasn't it? I mean, I guess it's no surprise FA Cup final in the 70s. United's chance to win a first trophy in 9 years, or first major trophy. But yeah, it was a cracking atmosphere.
Yeah, it's all like the colours and the banners at that point where that kind of thing was still going on. We've sort of lost that from football now. I mean, there's been that kind of retro attempt to bring it back, but the kind of naturalistic going to the match and acting balmy is still one of the greatest things about football, but this is one of its high points, I think.
Yeah, and the start to the game was interesting because there was a lot of expectation that United would fly out of the blocks.
Should we do the teams first?
Yes, we should, Daniel. Yes, we should. Go on. I'm sure you
Well-
can. I'm sure you and everyone else can name it. Stepney, Nicol, Greenhoff, Buchan, Albiston, Macari, McElroy, Coppell, Pearson, Greenhoff, Hill, Sub, McCreary. So it's 4-4-2/4-2-4. But Liverpool's formation was interesting. It's 4-3-3, but it's almost 4-3-3 with 6 wide players. So 2 in midfield, 2 up front, 2 at left back. Like Kennedy was doubling up a hell of a lot on Coppell, pretty effectively actually.
Yeah, it's not hard to dislike this Liverpool team at all if you actually look through the names.
Yeah, Tommy Smith has a moment or two in the game that kind of reinforce any perceptions we might have had about him.
Well, there's also the things that came to light about Tommy Smith subsequently as well.
Yeah,
there's a lot of moustaches in this team as well. There's Tommy Smith, McDermott, Case, Smith, Johnson, and Highway, which is almost half the team of moustaches.
Yeah, there should have been a quota system for that, surely.
And then you've got you've got Emin Hughes, who obviously those of us who grew up with Question Sport knew to have opinions about. But then obviously you've got Keegan and Hughes and their love for Margaret Thatcher. Phil Neal also managed to soil himself later on. And Ray Clements, though, was a mensch of the First Order.
Yeah, I always liked him.
He actually reminded me, Ray Clements. I mean, the greatest film I saw last year was a film called Clemency. So while we're talking about Ray Clements, I'm going to recommend that film. It's taxing to watch, but it's one of those occasions where just everything works. Like Alfred Woodard, amazing performance. Wendell Pierce, amazing performance. Amazing, beautiful cinematography from Eric Branco. Amazing performance from Aldous Hodge. Go and watch Clemency.
What's it about? Yeah, I've not heard of it.
It's about death row.
Oh, okay.
So Alfred Woodard plays I can't remember. She's the prisoner governor, and there are prisoners on death row, and there are protesters, and it's a really quiet film, but it's incredibly intimate and visually it absolutely knocked my spots off in a way I can't remember the last time I saw a film that was visually so dazzling and poignant and lush. So yeah, watch Clemency.
Wow, that sounds great.
And I was looking at the United team as well, and I was reminded of Martin Buchan's song. It was actually the B-side, I think, to the 76 Cup final single, Old Trafford Blues, where he basically just gently takes the piss out of all the players in the team, apart from Jim Holton, as you might know. Jim Holton gets a watch out centre forwards, being Jim Holton's after you. But this song actually once saved me a potential kicking when I was in Corbieres, like a popular, famous, great little boozer in Manchester. It was the evening of the 1-1 draw at Blackburn when Tevez equalised at the end.
Oh yeah.
For any eagle-eared Jews who are listening, yes, it was Seder night, which was that night where we beat Norwich and lost to Madrid, which is generally a 3-line whip for pretty much all stripes of Jew. But and I was out on the piss. Yes, I was. My friend Jeremy, who I think has missed 10 games in 10 years, missed that game. So that's how much of a 3-line whip it was. But my parents were in Israel and I wasn't yet married, so I had no familial responsibilities of my own. So I was able to go and enjoy United scoring in Fergie time. But we're in Corbière and there was someone got talking to me. And you know when in the toilets, and you know when someone puts their arm around you who you don't know, that you need to get out of there very quickly.
Yeah.
And he's asked me if I supported United, and I said that I did, and I guess he wasn't convinced by my accent, and so I said, "Well, let's sing a United song." This is all obviously taking place at the urinals, as these things do, and so I can't remember what United song I sung, and he was still not convinced. So he said, "Do you know the words to Old Trafford Blues?" And I said, "Yes, I do." So we sung Old Trafford Blues, and he took his arm away from around my shoulder, and we had a hug. So thank you, Martin. Thank you, Martin Buchan, for that. And I have another.
That's bizarre.
I have another pathetic anecdote. I once bought what should we call a bag off the sons of one of the United players in this team. And a friend of mine and me, we ingested one content of the bag on the way to the Panathinaikos game at Old Trafford, where Scholes scores that chip after about 4,000 passes. Mm. And I remember we were kind of stood there and we were trying to find ways of describing how beautiful that Scholes goal was, like similes about this goal being as beautiful as this and as beautiful as that. But so thank you also to the sons of one of those United players. It's a really good United team. This you'd be glad of quite a lot of these players now.
You would. It's also just a really good United kit, isn't it?
Oh, the kit's a beauty. I mean, it's got
every little detail, the V-neck, the stripes around the collar, and it's just lovely.
The black tracksuit as well.
Yeah, we should say it's the Admiral Reds, 77 kit, obviously. It's an absolute belter.
I actually called Martin Buchan a couple of years ago. I was writing a piece about Ajax in '76 before we played them in the UEFA Cup final, and he was working for the PFA at the time, so it was quite easy to find a number for. So I called him, and I was trying to get an interview. I remember Martin Buchan is the guy who Gordon Strachan later robbed the line, but when a reporter said, "Can I have a quick word?" he said, "Yes, velocity." And so I said to him, "Can I talk to you about the Ajax game?" "No." Silence. And I said, "Well, we're playing Ajax." I realised he's like, "Don't remember anything." Okay, thanks for your time. Like, it was a real, you get those place puttings.
Yeah.
Where you're reminded of exactly how insignificant you are to the cosmos.
Yeah, exactly.
It was a really deftly, gloriously administered one of those.
Funnily enough, the same season I emailed him. I didn't find a number to ask exactly the same to ask him about playing at City in the League Cup, and got a similarly curt reply. But he's so great, Mike Buck, and I'd love to know more about him. And I love the fact he just completely disappeared. No interest in any kind of celebrity or anything.
I mean, just the fact that he wrote a blues song about United, however naff it is, it's also brilliant. What would happen now if, imagine Harry Maguire suddenly turns up at training with his guitar and says, "Lads, I've written this."
Oh my God! It's worth stressing how brilliant a player Buchan was. He was doubtful for this game because he'd hurt his knee. I think it was West Ham in the last league game, and there was a lot of talk. Basically, if he doesn't play, forget it. And him and Brian Greenhoff was superb at centre back.
Yeah, I mean, when the game starts, actually, it's interesting that the pitch looks an absolute mess. And I'm not quite sure why. I was reminded that Ryan Giggs always said he never really quite played well at Wembley because the ball didn't run properly on the turf there. Which seems like an absolutely bizarre thing to say about something that is so fetishised, like the actual grass that people have previously come to have a look at, and is always prefixed by hallowed.
Hallowed turf is
hallowed turf.
Yeah.
Whereas we actually read in last week's Bible, when the portion that we read in synagogue last week is the bit where Moses goes to see the burning bush, which sounds, Moses and the burning bush sounds like something that you might have found on the VHS back in the day. But and it has that line that it says Admat Kodesh Hu, and that's where I think the line "Hallowed Turf" comes from. Holy ground this is. But it looks, one of the things I noticed, and I don't know why it really resonated with me, was the shadow of the ball. And it just kind of really took me back, like the shadow of the ball on the grass when the ball's in the air, where you've just got that beautiful sun that tells you it's a cup final.
That's interesting. The one thing that I couldn't take my eyes off, apart from the football, obviously, with the advertising hoardings, about half of them were for Rizzler, which I thought was quite amusing. And there was also Computer Car, call 019038383.
In that computer writing.
Yeah.
One of the things that was strange, I also noticed the Rizzler advertising, and there were a few strange things about it. Like, one of them was the order. I think it had the red ones in the middle, which is just like the OCD in me. It didn't work because you have the blue Rizzler are the thin ones, the extra thin ones. Then you have the green ones in the middle, and then the red ones. It's basically like skinning up in a piece of silver foil or a Post-it or something, which I once tried and doesn't work. In case you're ever thinking about doing that, got to the park, found we had long hike on a hot day to the park, found we had no skins, and I had my school bag, about 14 or something, did have a Post-it note. Oh, let's try this. No, it doesn't work. But it didn't have the Rizzler in either ascending or descending order of paper thickness, which didn't sit right with me. And another thing is, whoever uses any Rizzler that aren't blue, I don't believe that there's anyone whose ego can cope with not being able to skin up with the best papers. But yeah, the advertising hoardings there's such a hark back to a time that neither of us can remember, which is weird, where you feel nostalgic about a time for which you didn't exist.
Yeah, I did just about exist, but I'd have been 1.5. I quite like the one that just says Chessington World of Adventures Surrey. What, are you supposed to Google it? I don't understand.
That was a real school trip favourite, Chessington.
I don't think I ever went there, but yeah.
Yeah, like the pirate boat, the magic carpet was like a pirate boat, but it went over the top. I remember one of my mates chucking another one of my mates into the bubble works, which was quite controversial at the time. But then at the start of the game, one of the first things I noticed was that first of all, United are really like attacking the game, like quite early on. Like they get the ball into Greenhoff, he turns it into space behind for Macari, who shoots into the side netting, and they're really getting after it. And then a few seconds after that, Neil passes back to halfway line, and there's a boo. And it's not the first time that happens.
Yeah, one thing that struck me actually at all the reports as well is how kind of openly people talk about not how boring Liverpool are, but certainly how attritional, that's the word that's used a lot. Like if that happened now, you'd have people being sacked probably and just forced out of a job on Twitter. But it's definitely not just a United fan perception. I sometimes wonder about that, whether you kind of put it on them posthumously, but it's not the case at all. They were very methodical and very kind of clinical.
I kind of laughed to myself when we had those early back passes from so far out, because it's like you're seeing a stereotype satisfied. And in your mind, you think, well, we've built United up in our minds and part of our identity that United are these great entertainers who is it? It's like that famous cricket phrase. Is it Ian Bell like picking attacking options, or is it Shane Warne? I think like always picking attacking options, which you kind of look at as like the way that United play football, but also as a good way of approaching life. You pick attacking options.
You talk to the wrong man.
You know what I mean? Well,
I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, I feel like we've talked about this before, like offline, as like a way to look at existing, picking. And when you support a football team, you try and elevate the football team to represent aspects of existence that you think are worth something, whether it's fighting spirit or the kind of lesson of Eric Cantona, do what you think the right thing is, like go with your feelings, or whether it's rebounding, like rebuilding after Munich, like that informed the lives of those people, and the swagger with which the Docks Devils played informed the lives of the people that grew up watching them, and the way that they behaved when following United off the pitch, but also when just going about their lives. And I think we talked about this in the first pod, and I'm sure it's like this with the Docks Devils as well. Like it puts not just a spring into your step, but a swagger into your step when you're spending your time watching a football team who are playing in that way. And sometimes you wonder if it affects the kind of person that you become. But we've kind of put in our minds that United are this and Liverpool are that. United are the Cavaliers and Liverpool are the Roundheads, passing the ball back to the goalkeeper, protecting the 0-0, protecting the 1-0. So when you see it happen, there's that kind of mirthful self-satisfaction. We're right about that.
I totally agree with that. Has that made it harder for you with this Liverpool team? Because there's so much about them that I think reminds me of the treble side, and that pains me a wee bit, but also comforts me because whatever they achieve, hopefully it won't actually be a treble, and it certainly won't ever be a treble the way United achieved it.
You definitely need that treble to stay not won by anyone. You don't want to start arguing about qualities of treble. No, funny enough, you were the one who convinced me of this, because I know what you mean about arguing about it, but actually I've got this internal peace now, because no team could ever, it's not possible to win a treble the way United did, with all those late winners, all that drama, all those amazing games. And so I don't care what anyone says about that. That's kind of something that I'm completely at peace with. I feel that, but I mean, I still think that United's win against Arsenal in 2004 was one of the most important United games in my lifetime, because it preserved the treble. And perhaps that would be because if Arsenal had won a season going unbeaten in the league and won the treble, maybe we could forget that there wasn't a lot of competition in the league that season, and that they would have beaten Monaco and Porto or whatever. Those were the teams that were left in the Champions League. But even when United lost to Portsmouth in the Cup in 2008, happy birthday to me, incidentally, came out of watched that game at a friend's house, came out, and my car had been clamped, and his car had been clamped in the car park of our mate's flat. And then I was hunting, just looking at the clamp, and the person that clamped it had only left the key to the clamp next to the clamp. They dropped it. So I was then able to unclamp our cars, which made me feel slightly better. But there was an element of me, and I don't think it was just the raging hangover that I had and the absolute bastard behind the eyes, that I felt slightly relieved. Not relieved, that's not quite the right word, but that the specialness, the uniqueness of the treble had been preserved, even from another United team winning it.
Yeah. I do know what you mean. There's kind of two, in that sense, I completely get it. And I'm surprised that it's survived as long as it has. I thought City would do it a couple of years ago, or might do anyway, when they lost at Wigan. That was
that Wigan game, oh my God.
But I'm still quite comfortable with the idea that no one could do it as well as United did. And that's not, I don't mean in terms of the achievement, I mean in terms of the human experience.
Yeah. I mean, well, both. If you look at the teams that United beat to do it, the teams they beat to win the cup, the team they beat to win the league, the teams they beat in Europe, but for sure, in terms of the ups and downs and just the season long buzz, yeah, no one's getting close to that.
Back to this game, Liverpool started pretty well actually, which confounded most expectations.
Yeah, I mean, McDermott has a shot that gets deflected over on 7 minutes. Then there's another great back pass, a visionary back pass from Joey Jones on 8 minutes.
I was surprised by how filthy he was. I don't remember him. I don't remember much about him at all, to be honest. But he was a filthy bastard, even in the context of that team.
Yeah, I remember him from my first football album when he was at Chelsea by then, at Panini '85, in the Chelsea top with the hoops, like the different shapes.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's not someone I guess I saw play football very often. But he's also someone who you kind of, when you look at the team, you think they've got Joey Jones in this team. Like, really, how good can they be?
That's the thing. You look at the teams that would win subsequently, particularly once Souness joined and Dalglish was probably a slight upgrade on Keegan. But on paper, this isn't a great Liverpool team. I know Toshak was injured and they didn't have Fairclough on the bench. God knows why. But it's not a great team, is it?
I thought we'd come to this at the end when we sort of discussed where we go, but I guess we're here now. So it's so strange when you look at this statistically. I mean, when Sky did their greatest ever English team last season, this team was at the top.
Really?
Yeah, because they won because of the European Cups. And you can't argue with the European Cups. I mean, you can look at who they beat, Mönchengladbach, Bruges, and think I'd fancy a bit of that. Although the Bruges team they beat, I mean, it had beaten some good teams to get there. But you go down the team and you think, who are the great players here? And I mean, Keegan was, he was a great player of his era and a Liverpool great. But when you make the list of the greatest players of all time, Keegan's not getting in your top 100 probably.
No. It feels to me a lot better a year later when they had Souness and Dalglish.
Oh, for sure. I mean, Souness was an unbelievable player, and I think Dalglish, you said he was a slight upgrade on Keegan. I'm not best placed to say, but what I've seen, he seems like a significant upgrade on Keegan because Keegan was a player who made the best of his talent.
Yeah.
And Dalglish made the best of his talent and had a lot more of it.
That's true.
I mean, the player who really impressed me most of the Liverpool players in this game, and I should say also, really enjoyed watching this game. I haven't seen it for ages. It was a really good game. Was Ray Kennedy.
Yes, yeah, he was excellent. I thought Jimmy Case was good as well, but Kennedy, you could see his class.
One of the things that I've occurred to me also, Brian Moore says there are 400 million people watching. And I thought about that. And I thought, how many other things reach an audience that wide? Like, never mind that, like then, now. And when you look at it in that context, it seems mad that it took so long for evil to catch on.
Because, yeah, it's so true.
Like, why did it take so long for repressive oil regimes or people or committers of what Forbes magazine called the greatest corporate larceny of all time on Roman Abramovich? I'm surprised it took them so long to cotton on that if you want to protect your life because people know who you are or just reach a load of people, English football is what you want.
Yeah, and you're right. It's very surprising. 400 million. I was thinking about that actually in the context of Arthur Albiston playing at the age of 19 because Stuart Houston had a broken ankle, I think. Imagine if, and I'm sure that figure wasn't relayed to him, but imagine you're 19, you know you're going to be watched by 400 million people.
I mean, he does talk about how nervous he was, and it got made into a big thing, like the him and Houston thing, that he was doing it for Stuart, which he says he never quite said. But yeah, I mean, it's different, I guess, at that point, the FA Cup, because it was such a big event. I mean, I imagine it was the biggest event in world television. I mean, the only things you could think about that will come close, maybe Eurovision, the Wimbledon final. I mean, how many people were living in America at that point? Maybe some kind of Ali fight.
Yeah.
I mean, as it goes, they actually showed an Ali fight when he on this day he fought. I'll tell you who it was. He fought Alfredo Evangelista following his disputed victory over Ken Norton, having been retired for 8 months. But 400 million people is just. I mean, it's just an astonishing quantity. But Albiston's actually starts really well. He has that run down the left where he bousts past a couple of men. And United are actually, as the game develops, United start to play quite well. Like Clements has to tip over across from Hill. But then on 18 minutes, Case sticks one through for Keegan, and Albiston is there with a brilliant slide tackle to actually deal with it. Although you could probably say defenders had a little bit more leeway with their slide tackles at that point.
Yeah, that was a great tackle because Keegan would have been through. You're right about that. There's one later on when Case puts Macari up in the air, kind of ball and man tackle. You can't quite see because there's no replay, but it looks the kind of challenge that might interest VAR these days.
Jones also sticks one on Macari, and the ref calls him over, and they keep going on about it.
Yeah, I know. He's calling him over.
Yeah, and then he stands there with his arms crossed over his chest.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure why. Brian Moore calls it the enthusiasm of the moment. And it actually made me think about how we feel about violence on the football pitch, which is the topic to which we keep returning. Because on Twitter this week, we did Great United Tackles, and people got very upset about it. And I probably have said this in my life a lot. It never occurred to me how much doing that was going to piss someone off. But when I see people land tackles on United players, if the players are okay, there's kind of part of you that thinks, yeah, like when Joey Jones landed that tackle on Macari, I wasn't incandescent with rage. I was excited at the retribution that might be to come, the other tackles that might be to come.
No, I agree. Yeah, it's just when it's in the past and when you know the person's okay, it just has a cartoon quality, I think. And you can, I know people got particularly annoyed because one of them was on Jose Antonio Reyes, but the whole idea that you're somehow disrespecting the dead by doing that, I just find like ludicrous, absolutely ludicrous. There was one who said you'll be lucky to have your account in the morning, and tried to get people to
banned in the morning. You're getting banned in. I mean, it's just
I don't understand that world.
Yeah, like the grassing element of that is quite closely related to I think what we're saying, but it's also Arsene Wenger's best teams could mix it, and I say that as a compliment. To complain about someone booting Reyes when you had Patrick Vieira, Petit, Lauren, like serious players who liked getting involved in the physical side of things.
Dennis Bergkamp had very twitchy elbows, and no one seemed to complain about that too
That's
much.
the thing, like when you kind of assess football like that, you try not to be partisan. I mean, obviously you're partisan that you support a team, but when you evaluate things, and it's just the Scholes tackle on Rez, it was as we're talking about the 2004 Cup semi-final, it's a late tackle, but it's not sinister. And I mean, the things that we didn't include Best on Pardo, and we didn't include Buchan on Bell, because basically those tackles ruin careers. But when it's just a cartoon pantomime boot, I mean, who didn't grow up booting their mates and their siblings up and down the playground and the garden and the bedroom whilst playing football? Like that's part of the joy of football, that you sometimes say, right, no fouls, and everyone, or murder ball or whatever, and everyone would start clattering people. And that was part of the joy of youth. So when you see it reenacted on the pitch, for me anyway, it recaptures some of the stuff that I love most about football, that I loved when I played football growing up.
And also, it's just funny. I was reading something with David Chase, an essay about a Q&A about The Sopranos, and he was talking about how the things he finds funny that a lot of people wouldn't, in the context of Sopranos, murder and so on. And it just, well, to a lot of people, it just is. I completely get that some people might not find it funny, but I don't think they have the right to say it's disgraceful, blah, blah, blah. It's just each to their own,
Yeah, one of the other things I noticed was quite early on, Stepney sends a ball downfield with a throw. And it reminded me, and he talked about this, because I don't think it was that common at the time. And when we interviewed him for Busby, he said, I use the ball more by throwing the ball out because I like to keep possession. But my own way was I made sure that I was loud at the back, and my back four believed in me. I made sure that whatever I did, they would believe in me. So when he went over them, they wouldn't have to worry. They could move forward and I would find them.
That's interesting.
Yeah, because, I mean, you obviously associate that most with Peter Schmeichel, and Stepney couldn't chuck it as far as Peter Schmeichel. But I think one of the reasons United signed him was actually the ability to build attacks from the back.
No, that would make sense. One slightly, not disappointing, but one striking thing about this game is actually that the two wingers didn't have much of a role. Hill barely got on the ball, and Koppel was decent to start, but then he eventually became more and more of almost a third central midfielder, trying to help Macari and McElroy.
You could see that Koppel was a player.
Oh, yeah, totally. You're right. You said it last week, I think, in his decision making. It's so good. Although, funnily enough, he does have one a terrible decision early in the game he gets away with when he kind of dithers in the area.
He tries to hook it.
Yeah, robbed by Kennedy, and then he actually does well to recover, though, and get it away, basically, in the end. But, yeah.
There's a real precision with Koppel.
Yes.
That he assesses situations very quickly, and then he very quickly does the right thing in that situation. Like Scholes and Greenwood are the people we've talked about before, I think, who have that knack. And it's interesting because they're not remotely similar players, but it's just that innate understanding of the demands that a football match places upon you and understanding how to react.
Yeah, I think that's really important. It's really a few years ago, I interviewed Rod Atkinson for something, and he was talking about his favourite players who he'd had, and one of them was Kevin Richardson. I said, "What's so good about him?" And he said, "He just always did the right thing," which sounds so simple. It probably is, but not many manage to do it.
Well, that's the point. Is it sounds simple and it is, but it can sometimes be hard not to overcomplicate things.
We've all played football when everything's whirling around you. You know, it's incredibly difficult to always make the right decision
because it's so chaotic. Football.
Yeah, it is. One thing that irritated me slightly was when Tommy Smith, toward near half-time, boots Stuart Pearson up in the air, then has the effrontery to motion that Pearson has dived towards the referee. As well as being slightly irritating, I thought it was quite interesting because you always associate the 70s as dirty, but also there was supposedly a kind of innate honesty in it all, you know, boot each other's balls off and then help each other find them and all that. But Smith quite brazenly motions about a dive, and it's clearly not. He properly nails Pearson as well.
So I wondered if it was one of the first time we've seen the diving gesture.
Yeah, I suppose Freddie Lee would have.
That wasn't a gesture.
No, but I mean, he would have induced it a few times, wouldn't he?
But he also didn't. Freddie Lee actually dive.
Yeah,
to indicate a dive once.
Oh, he did against United, wasn't it? Against United. It was in the 3-3 draw, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And he actually performs a swan dive.
Yeah.
And just before Smith performs that diving gesture, Highway sticks Johnson away, and I think it's Greenhoff. He turns inside out and drives over. And then in commentary, Jack Charlton thinks that he should have passed, and he goes, "We had two men in what we call the overlap position."
Yeah, no, I picked up on that. In what we call, yeah, it's great, isn't it?
It reminds me of the first match of the day when Liverpool play Arsenal. I think it is. And Ken. No, actually, it's not. It's not the Liverpool Arsenal game. It's definitely not Ken Livingstone because there was nothing said about Jews or Hitler. But it's the first match of the day after the '66 Cup final, and Ken Wolstenholme welcomes all the people that have been drawn to the game by the World Cup and says that he will take care to point out the more technical aspects of the game.
Brilliant.
And that was really his commentary style. Like if you watch the Matthews Cup final, it's like that as well. It's very pedagogical. It's almost like people who go on, like you're going on a guided acid trip, and he's the straight guy who sort of narrates you through it.
Yeah.
And it was very pedagogical at the time, and that's how it was with Jack Charlton, whose commentary in the main is pretty good.
Yeah, he picks up on things. The other interesting thing about his commentary, he doesn't say a word until the 10th minute, which I know we've spoken about before. Co-commentators in those days were called expert summarisers because there's a different role, but I thought it was interesting. Literally 10 minutes in before he opens his mouth.
How long does it take to drink a pint of Guinness? Then just before half time, but just before that, on 39 minutes, United are singing "Who's That Team They Call United," and it's really loud. And United fans are generally much louder, and I kind of balk at saying that because there's partly it feels like that childish argument about who can clap louder, and that's really what we're doing in our 40s. But there is something affirming about hearing it, and also there's something that I love about hearing songs being sung that we sing now that were being sung before I was born.
Yeah,
like I had the granddad who got my dad into United. He had a season ticket at Old Trafford in the 40s and 50s, and he passed United on to my dad. And I never met him. He died in '63, and there's something about I think like the Bouncing Bunch of Busby, the United Calypso. Sorry, I suddenly forgot. The United Calypso is my favourite United song, and one of the reasons it's my favourite United song is because it kind of roots me in the past. That I like to think that my granddad, who I never met, would have sung this song, would have known this song, and I'm still singing it now all these years later. There's something affirming about hearing those songs being sung, and then on 42 minutes, basically Liverpool have their best chance of the game, where Case crosses to the back post, and Kennedy, who used to be a striker until when he was Arsenal, he was a striker. Liverpool moved him into midfield, and he heads it, and it's not that clear whether he heads it onto Stepney's foot or against the post.
I think it's the post. The corner was given, and I think most reports and also the commentators say Stepney, but I think it hit the post, the outside of the post.
Jack Charlton says, "Well, the referee's given a corner, so he must have saved it." And well, don't personally. Have
they really trust the accuracy of the decision, don't they? They talk like if it's clearly offside, and then there's one where Brian Moore says that, and Jack Charlton says, "Well, actually, Brian, I'm not sure it was." But one quick note on Kennedy. He was the inspiration. His move from centre forward to midfield was the inspiration for Whiteside. I think Ron Atkinson said he always had that in mind with Whiteside, purely because of how he'd seen it work with Kennedy.
And back to Stepney, because who may or may not have saved it. In parentheses, he did not save it. But I was reminded of this story he told us about when he signed for United. And United come and see him, and he gets on the train. He has to go on the train from London to Manchester with Busby and Jimmy Murphy. So he said to Jimmy Murphy, go and get some newspapers. Now, I honestly thought, brilliant. For at least an hour or whatever, I can be reading the newspaper. Because I didn't know what to say to Matt Busby for 3.5 hours with Jimmy in a carriage. So we get on the train and there's a table, just one table in this first-class carriage. And Matt was sat there and Jimmy was sat there. And Jimmy handed the papers out. And I started reading only a few words. And then he slid the Daily Express across the table like that. Sliding motion. And he says, "What's all that, son?" And I look, and on the front page, there was a head and shoulders picture of my wife. "I'm not moving to Manchester. I'm not living in Coronation Street." I said.
Oh my God, that's brilliant.
I said, "Boss, I didn't say that. The press must have got that." And then he carries on and he says, "Do you know what? 6 weeks later, I was in digs with Jimmy Ryan around the corner from Old Trafford, and we were playing down in London. And we used to go back to London at the weekends, and if we didn't have a midweek game. And Matt said, 'Bring your wife up on a Monday.' You know what he did? He said to me, 'You need to buy a house now.' And he said, 'I have an estate agent waiting for you to show you around some houses.' So my wife had never been further than the Watford Gap in her life. So got on the train and we got up Piccadilly Station. Who was standing there? Matt Busby. He avoided me. He went straight to my wife, gave her a kiss, 'Welcome to Manchester.' And I said, 'Right, boss, where's the estate agent?' And he said, 'I'm here.' And he showed me around 6 houses, me and my wife around 6 houses. Is there any more to say about Matt Busby?"
That's tremendous.
It really is. I mean, it's that person. It's so Fergie as well, that personal touch.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where you just sweep everyone up in your charisma. And Busby's a little bit different to Fergie because his charisma's not as obvious. It's more the presence that you notice when he walks in a room without saying anything. And it's quite hard to describe that unless you felt it. But it's that concern for the people that inspires them to love you.
Yeah.
The other thing that rang a bell just before half-time was the flicker in the top right screen, that black and white diagonal little square that told you adverts were coming.
Oh, yeah.
And then on the programme for half-time, there was half-time marching display by the massed bands of Her Majesty's Royal Marines, Director of Music, Lieutenant Colonel Paul Neville, MVO, FARM, RM. Thank you for that.
Right, on medium pace.
Yeah, exactly.
So how would you summarise the first half? I just thought Liverpool slightly better, but not many chances either way.
I really enjoyed the game.
Yeah, me too. It was a game where it felt like something was always about to happen, but never quite did in the first half.
But it wasn't dull. Like there was, because there are some games where you watch and you go back further. If you go back to the 40s and the 50s Cup final, it doesn't quite look like football. Like the pace is extremely sedate and the defending is extremely gentle.
Yeah, no, the pace of this was really good.
But this looked like a game of football as we understand what a game of football looks like today. And when I say that, I'm not denigrating the players who played in the 40s and 50s. The best players from that era, if they had the training and the institutional support that the players had today, they'd still be brilliant players. Like there's nothing about being born earlier that makes you inherently less good. It's just the things around you, the support, basically, the infrastructure.
Yeah.
But it's funny because Jack Charlton is really sure what's going to happen. He says, if Liverpool keep playing the way they are, there's no way I can see Manchester winning this game. It's just a matter of time before Liverpool get a goal.
And actually, Liverpool pretty much do keep playing the way they were. It's just United play a bit better and also get a wee bit of luck. But I thought United were just slightly the better team in the second half.
Yeah, but there was no point where I watched it where obviously I did know the score, but where you're fearing that Liverpool are going to do it, and Liverpool are going to score. It felt like an even game, and to confidently predict the result of the game at that point shows you how confident Charlton was in how good Liverpool were.
Yes.
which in turn tells you how good Liverpool were. Like, I'm not saying it to denigrate Charlton by saying you read the game poorly. Look, you were wrong. It's interesting to see the confidence that he had in the Liverpool team, which also tells you about how well United did to beat them.
Yeah. Yeah, especially as United had to play not a different way, but it was more of a hard fought victory than I remembered.
Yeah, I mean, so on 51 minutes, United scored. Do you want to talk us through the goal?
Yeah, it's a lovely finish. Well, it's a long goal kick from Stepney, and then you have 4 consecutive headers. Emlyn Hughes, Keegan slightly misdirected. McElroy heads onto Greenhoff, who steers this lovely header through to Pearson, gets away from Jones, and then just rattles it past Clements at the near post. I mean, a lot of people say, as they do now, keeper shouldn't be bitten near post, but I think there's 2 things about this that mitigate that a little bit. A, the pace of the shot, and B, Pearson takes it earlier than you would expect.
Do you know what it reminded me of? It reminded me of Roon against Dida.
Oh, yeah. No, I can see
It wasn't as accurate a shot. Like, I don't think Dida could have stopped Roon's, and I think Clements could have stopped it. But I agree that seeing a goalkeeper beaten at the near post, you don't immediately look for your book of footballing cliche and say no goalkeeper should be beaten at the near post, because sometimes shots at the near post are good. Sometimes the goalkeeper's in the right position, but it was a good shot. Felt he could have saved it. Oh, and enjoyed the Brian Moore commentary. He goes, Jones is after it, Pearson shot, goal! And then
celebration's brilliant, isn't it? Just walking towards United fans, clenched fist, arm flexed. It's just beautiful.
And just that famous Pearson celebration. But then when we saw it from the other angle, he obviously in the act of shooting, he falls down, but he knows he's going to score, and there's just this total glee on his face as he's falling because he knows he's going to score, and then he gets into that famous celebration. The other thing is, because I was semi-disappointed, because when Brian Moore was commentating, I was hoping there was no and it's in there, which I guess must have come later.
Yeah, possibly. There's a game between Forest and Liverpool in, I think it was New Year's Day 1990, so new decade. He started off with 3 it's in there's in one sentence. He crossed in there towards Hodges in there, and it's in there. Yeah, in one sentence, which is just like, yeah, anyway. But no, it's a good.
What Brian Moore's good at is Brian Moore's really good at the silences.
Yes, he is. I love Brian Moore. Mate, he just had more than anything, he had a brilliant voice for football commentary. Not always what he said, but the delivery was so good.
He was also meant to be an absolutely top bloke.
Yeah.
Which I believe is also the case with Barry Davis.
I don't know Barry well, but I did have the pleasure once on my birthday, actually, it was the best birthday present I ever had, of having a couple of pints with Barry Davis and interviewing him. And it was just for 2 hours. It was an absolute pleasure. Yeah, he couldn't. I thought it'd be an hour, and I said, "Oh, you probably have to go." And he said, "No, I'm enjoying the chat." And just an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, Tyler is also meant to be really sound.
Yeah, in my experience, he's an extremely nice human being, albeit again limited experience.
But the thing, because I think the thing with Brian Moore is you're right about the voice, but he's not one for lines. Like Barry Davis is good at lines, and some of the radio commentators are also really good at lines. But with Brian Moore, it's just the ability to talk at the right times and to shut up at the right times. And there is obviously something comforting in his voice because we grew up with it. But he had that level of individuality and personality without taking over. And Motson had it as well, where it enables them to feel like friends, whereas I don't feel like, of the current lot, Clive Tilsley has it and Peter Drury has it, but the rest of them are a muchness, like your Guy Mowbray's, your Darren Fletcher's of this world. Like,
it's definitely changed. They're definitely less distinctive, I would say. Or is that just the way we respond to them? I don't know. As you get older.
There's just more football, so it's hard to be distinctive when you commentate on so much football, or when everything is so important that you don't have anywhere to go, like Mike Costello says, when you need to go somewhere. I'm not sure, where you're kind of under pressure to sell subscriptions, so everything has to be the greatest thing that anyone's ever seen.
I'm sure there's a big element of that, actually, and that must be so frustrating for those commentators as well, because they must feel deep down that people are only getting kind of 70% of their best because they have to pander to certain needs. I don't know.
Yeah, United end after the goal is absolutely bouncing. It's a great crowd shot of the whole end going absolutely wild, just ballooning, which is, I mean, that's sort of kind of the distillation of football. It's not even what's going on the pitch. It's what going on the pitch makes happen off the pitch, and the ability to behave in a manner that you would not ordinarily behave while going about your business.
Yeah, exactly. You wouldn't start doing that in the aisle in Tesco's, would you? Well,
I probably have done.
yeah. So the Pearson goal is a start of this crazy 5-minute period, 3 goals. Liverpool equalised, I think it's 2 minutes later. Lovely nutmeg from the referee in the build-up.
Oh my God, there are a couple of those. Like, he's so nonchalant in the way the ball goes through his legs.
It's Falcao-esque, isn't it? Just slowly opens his legs and lets it go through.
And then what? Yeah, so there's the Liverpool goal where Keegan sends the ball into Case, and he catches the ball on his thigh and on the leap. I mean, it is a really good control piece of control. And then he turns and lashes it past Stepney. I think Stepney should probably have saved it.
I wondered about that. It's hard to see from the angle.
They don't have a good, but his reaction suggests that. Like, he sort of lies on the floor, goes to get up, lies back down again. And Brian Moore does come up with a great line. He says, "Stepney prostate, Liverpool celebrate," which is a beautiful line.
Yeah, that's
I think Stepney should have stopped it.
It's a really good take that takes up the thigh. The second touch is really good as well. Just lobs it away from Buchan, I think it is, and then spanks it on the turn. Yeah, I did wonder about Stepney. It's hard to be certain, but yeah, it did look like it wasn't right in the top corner.
And his hands were near.
Yeah.
It was kind of shoulder height, not... Yeah.
He had a slightly nervy game, didn't he? He dropped a couple, albeit he was fouled, but he dropped a couple of high balls, and there was another one later on when he almost threw one at Keegan's feet. He had a slightly nervous game.
Yeah, I think, that's true. And then, obviously, 2 minutes later, United score again, and that is these are the greatest kinds of goals when your opponent, like, you want it right before the end, but when your opponent is still celebrating, to then go and get a goal is incredible. And so there's basically a hopeful punt. I think it's Jimmy Nicholl, and Pearson wins a brilliant flick on. He outjumps Hughes, who had an absolute mare. And then Smith gets caught, and Greenhoff outmuscles him. And the ball breaks to Macari, and he whacks it in off Jimmy. And the ball's in the net! Neil gets caught there! And then Brian Moore also says, "I think Macari will claim it."
Yeah, good luck with that. It's going almost at right angles of his foot, and then it hits Greenhoff. Does it hit Greenhoff on the hand? I couldn't quite tell.
I thought it was a chest,
but
probably. It wasn't going in, was it?
No, it wasn't. It was barely going out for a goal kick, which makes it even more enjoyable.
Yeah, and Calvin Betton, who's a great friend of the show, one of sent the message, and he says that Jimmy Greenhoff took a pay cut to come to United, which is funny because you would think that United would have been the best payers at the time, except Matt was tight.
Yes.
I mean, and all that is basically, and I interviewed person after person after person, and I said, what was Matt's worst quality? And the response kept coming back, he didn't have one, nothing. What should Matt have been if he wasn't a football manager, prime minister, God, king? Like, literally, people saying this stuff seriously. The only thing that people would say about Matt was he was tight. And he was obviously still controlling the purse strings at that point. United weren't allowed to buy Mike England, for example. But yeah, he took a pay cut to come and play for United, which tells you about the pull of United, even though they haven't done the thing in the best part of a decade.
Weren't Stoke in the second division as well?
Yeah, I'd like to say yes. I'd like to say yes. I think they were.
Either way, it's really interesting.
Yeah, the other thing about Greenhoff is that he was always that guy when people said, who's the best player never to play for England? It was always him.
Yeah.
And then it sort of became Steve Bruce.
Yeah, it did, but I think Greenhoff is still probably higher on the list.
It's weird because when you think, and it sort of started, I would say, with Graham Taylor, where the caps got handed out. Yeah. From then, they ended up in some, like, Graham Taylor gave them to, like, Andy Gray from QPR. I think it was maybe at Villa at the time.
Palace.
Palace, I mean, yeah, Andy Gray, who scored 2 amazing goals against United. And I think a game I was at, I think it was 88-89, towards the end of the season. We lost 3-2 at Loftus Road. But Andy Gray, Jeff Thomas, obviously Carlton Palmer. And you end up with, like, just before this amazing generation, like Jake Livermore.
Yeah.
Where just the caps were going in all sorts of places, whereas before that, caps were extremely hard to get. Like, how many England caps did Matt Le Tissier get? And Andy Cole, Robbie Fowler.
Yeah, it's
like,
a good point.
Proper players. We
did this a while ago, like Joy of 6 on uncapped players, and there are some really good ones. Like Mickey Hazard's another one. If he was playing now, he'd certainly have got, like 10 caps at least.
Yeah, who else was there?
there was this Dutch guy, was it Horst Blankenberg, who basically, I forget the details now, this is terrible. I think he played sweeper for Bayern after Beckenbauer, but he couldn't get a Dutch cap because whoever the Dutch sweeper was, this is terrible. I forgot the whole thing. Ralph Milne was on there actually because of the Ralph Milne that they knew in Scotland rather than the Ralph Milne we knew. I can't remember the others. It was so long ago, but I remember at the time. Oh, John McGovern was another one, who obviously was one of the key players in Forest European Cup winning teams. There's so many around that period.
Yeah, where it was hard. And the other thing about Jimmy Greenhoff that I always think about now when I think of him was before United played against Barcelona in Rome, we had a big long lunch, and so we were all it was like a big group of us, and we were with some of the dads as well. So obviously drink was taken, and I said to one of the dads who's been following United since the 50s, like went to Madrid away in '68, teach the song. And the song he came up with after what was then 50 years of watching the famous Man United was clap, 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 Greenhoff. And that was it. So thank you for that, Mike. I learned a new song. I'm glad something good came of that day.
So after United go 2-1 up, there's never an onslaught, is there? It's just sort of decent Liverpool pressure, but not too many chances. A couple of quick things before we talk about the chances I noticed. One was Joe Fagan, two things. The benches were so close together, weren't they? They were pretty much next to each other, which is crazy.
They could literally whisper in each other's ears.
Yeah,
and I wondered if it was the camera angle, but it wasn't. And later in the game, Brian Moore comments on it.
And Joe Fagan who was Bob Page's assistant, jauntily lighting up after 64 minutes. You wouldn't have that now, obviously. The other thing I was interesting was United's offside trap, this really extravagant offside trap, which Liverpool kept walking into. They didn't play it all the time. It seemed to be mainly when a set piece was cleared, just everyone out, and Liverpool would just get caught. Because in those days, of course, if you were on the left wing, nowhere near the ball, if you were in an offside position, that was enough. So that worked pretty well and kind of helped not kill the last half hour, but just, interrupt it from time to time.
Yeah, we'll post a photo of it because I took a screenshot of how close they were on the bench, because it's almost like they weren't just close in the way you understand close. They were uncomfortably personal space invading close.
Yeah, it's bizarre.
Where you would feel uncomfortable that anyone was that near you, never mind your rival. And how on earth are you talking about the game when your rival is right in earshot? The person that needs not to hear you is right there. And it shows again, I suppose, like that the animosity hadn't quite taken over yet.
No, absolutely. But even
because imagine putting Fergie next to Benitez or Wenger or whoever.
Yeah.
Like imagine Mourinho being that close to someone. Like, what would he be doing to them?
Mourinho.
He'd be like burning the hairs on their back with a lighter. with Joe Fagan's lighter, there'd be all sorts going on.
Yeah. It really stood out. It was extremely odd.
Strangely, though, I sort of thought like United sort of get closer to scoring again before Liverpool do. There's a really lovely cross that Gordon Hill teases in that's just too far in front of Greenhoff before Kennedy whacks one over.
Yeah, Kennedy, there was a lovely layoff from Keegan before that Kennedy chance. And then there were a couple, like there's a Greenhoff backheader. He doesn't see Stepney coming and it almost lobs him, but Stepney grabs it.
Just before that, just on 66 minutes, one of the things that, because it's always looking, when I watch these, I'm looking for things you don't see anymore. And the United end are singing 2-1 to Amazing Grace. 2-1, 2-1. And it's just so moving almost. It's beautiful. It's strange how things come in and out, but you never really hear people singing that anymore.
Yeah.
And there was also a very, very early Forever and Ever, which you normally expect to hear when the game is done. And on 74 minutes, we're going to win the cup. And you're kind of thinking, there's a bit of work to do here, lads.
Yeah. Well, even the commentators with a few minutes to go anoint United, don't they? Which I always thought was slightly odd. So
do we think that late goals have increased in recent times?
Yeah, possibly. That's a good question. Yeah, maybe so. Maybe that whole kind of desperate onslaught towards the end. I don't know.
I mean, it felt like, just talking about Fergie's United, that it became a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, definitely.
And there were way more late goals coming in the last 5 seasons than there were from when they started scoring them in sort of the 10 years from when they started getting them until then.
Yeah.
because everyone just knew it was coming. And when it started coming at the beginning, you could tell yourself, well, it's just this team, or they've just got a couple of good substitutes. But when it started repeating over team after team after team, there sort of ceases to become, you cease to have a rational argument as to why it's not going to happen to you.
Yeah, exactly. It just perpetuates itself, doesn't it? And it did. Even towards the end with a team that wasn't that great, even in 12-13, all those comebacks, all those late winners.
Yeah, but as you say, there was no onslaught from Liverpool. There was that header where you talked about it before, where Buchan and Keegan both missed the ball, and Greenhoff has a man behind him, so he's got to do something. And then he actually mistimes his jump, which I think helps him, because if he's timed that properly, there's a chance he's doing an Ian Dowie, where he properly spanks a header past the keeper, like he might have forgotten that he's not attacking. But because he mistimes his jump, he can't get any power in it, so it loops up for Stepney to catch.
The funny thing about that is the one time, obviously you watch this game knowing the score and everything, it was the one time in the game watching it about how it actually jumped, just because it was so unexpected, even though you know it's 2-1. It's probably just a natural reaction to seeing a potential own goal, but I thought that was quite interesting.
Yeah, I feel that too, where you have that. I remember watching the Sheffield Wednesday Rumbelows game that we lost, watching it again, and where they look like they're going to score, there's a scramble. It looks like they're going to score in the second half. Like the kind of like the 12-year-old in me was like, maybe it's going to go in on
this time.
Like, it's not possible that they couldn't score from here, so I must have miswatched it. But otherwise, it's weird because Liverpool strikers do almost nothing. Like the only one who looks like he's going to make something happen is fucking Jimmy Case.
Yeah, who goes up front when they bring on Ian Callaghan for David Johnson, who did nothing.
And he has that time where he shoots. It's a really tame shot, but Stepney somehow spills it and has to drag it back into his grasp before Keegan sticks it in from about 2 yards.
The other weird thing about Liverpool, and Paisley got a fair bit of stick for this, is that they didn't have David Fairclough on the bench. And even by that stage, he sort of had a burgeoning relationship with super sub. Like people knew his role, so because they only had one sub in those days, and they had Ian Callaghan instead, which is very odd.
Yeah, well, it's back to that. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like if you put someone on who people know is a super sub, then people are wary, and you might think, well, they know to watch him, but I think much more they know that he can do it, and that is disconcerting.
Yeah, definitely. And it had famous Sonettian moment, obviously, so he did have a bit of a reputation.
And Liverpool's impotence in attack is what makes me think, like, how on earth could this team be that good? However good the combination play was. Sometimes you need individual brilliance to break a game, and it's not quite there yet. Like, Dalglish has much more of that. And once they slot Souness in, it means that they're much more able to dictate in midfield. Like, you wouldn't have fancied this United midfield so much with Souness.
No, that's true. Although I thought Macari and McIlroy were fantastic. The energy on Macari in particular.
Yeah, just everywhere.
Because often they're properly moving forward as well. There's times when they're beyond the front players. You think incredible amount of energy, really.
Yeah, and I mean McIlroy. It's funny because McIlroy was still playing. A couple of these players were still playing when we were able to remember. I remember McIlroy from the '86 World Cup sticker book. And obviously Orbiston was still at United then as well. And he talks about, like, I think he had a tearful reunion with Stuart Houston in the dressing room afterwards, and offered him his medal, and he wouldn't take it.
Yeah, that's right. I read that as well.
Actually, before we get on to that, there was that one more chance. First of all, Hill gets subbed on 81 minutes and does not look at all happy. No, he's not. And then on 88 minutes, Keegan wins a brilliant flick on, and Greenhoff's caught ball watching, so Kennedy barges straight through him and absolutely clatters a left footer from outside the box that clips the top of the bar.
Yeah,
I felt like Stepney might have had it covered because it did hit the top of the bar.
Yeah, I think he did. It was a really good effort. It was a beautiful strike, but I do think Stepney had it covered.
But there was no... A club's more willing to accept defeat now.
Well, I don't know. More willing to accept...
Sorry, were clubs more willing to accept defeat then?
I don't know, because if you look at the Liverpool players' reaction, they were pretty devastated.
Okay, so let me phrase it differently then. Do we understand better how to chase a game now than
possibly?
then?
Yeah, maybe there's more more desperation tactically, throwing people forward and so maybe because you're right. There was at no stage were United properly under siege, as people would say now.
I mean, if you look at Liverpool's team now, for example, like they've got fullbacks that can make you a goal out of nothing.
Yeah,
and Never mind like the strikers. And obviously having more substitutes is really helpful because you give defenders a different thing to think about. You have more strikers on the pitch. You have fresh players. So I think that is part of it. But the ball wasn't in the United box a lot. And you would expect to see more of that.
No, definitely. Particularly against such an attacking team. United tightened it slightly when Macari came off the hill, but that's only for the last 8 minutes. Yeah, it did surprise me actually how relatively... It's difficult, isn't it? Because you look back now and it feels relatively comfortable, but I bet for people watching at the time, it's a proper arse nipper, as Ashley Giles would say.
Yeah, and then obviously United win, and Liverpool players just all sink to the turf, and they just all sit there like school children almost. While United are obviously going wild, and random lads with flares are wandering about, who've just decided to walk on.
There's so much goodwill, though, isn't there, between the players? Even Docherty goes over and shakes all the Liverpool players by the hand. There's absolutely not even a hint of animosity. Yeah,
in the Red Army years, Richard Kirk writes, yes, United fans actually chanted Liverpool in magnanimity as the Scousers traipsed past on their own lap of honour. The arrest rate was negligible, the hatred confined to minority pockets.
How quickly that changed. When was the... what year was it the guy had the dart in his nose at Anfield? That was late 70s, wasn't it? So that would change pretty quickly.
Yeah, it must have been around then. Yeah, so I mean that's why I guess this was the age of innocence's last cup final, like you wrote.
Yeah.
But I mean, it does seem strange to think about that. I remember I went to a charity shield, the charity shield in Cardiff, where Rude's debut, and my mate, I was meeting a mate, and I can't remember why, but I'd had the tickets sent to him, and so he was picking up the tickets, and he was, and so I was just stood outside on my own, waiting for a couple of mates who were late, and the game had kicked off, and the bricks and the bottles were flying, and I said to a steward, where should I go? He said, what are you talking about? Just go and batter some Scousers. And then I was like, yeah, fine, sorted. That's what I do. And funnily enough, then get into that game. And been in there a few minutes, and Liverpool score. And then it's half time, and you think, we're 1-0 down. They show the highlights, and it turns out that, in fact, we're 2-0 down. It's like going because the roof was on, so pissing it down with rain that day. The roof was on, so didn't hear any noise for the first goal, and it was before phones, where phones existed. It's like going to the doctor with a cold, and he tells you actually you got pneumonia. And I mean, United celebrate well. I think I enjoyed the celebrations.
Yeah. It's so easy to forget. First major trophy. They won the second division, but first trophy in 9 years, which I think is still the biggest gap since the war. I mean, it's a huge thing.
Yeah, and obviously it all then, in classic United of the period, it all turns to shit pretty quickly after that.
Phenomenally quickly, yeah. Tommy Docherty obviously was eventually sacked for falling in love with Mary Brown,
who was really extremely lovely lady when we went to the Doc's house.
He wasn't sacked just for that, we should stress. She was the wife of the physio, Laurie Brown.
And he was apparently sending Laurie Brown out on club business in order to enjoy a bit of How's Your Father.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's really it's quite an interesting moral question, that,
really
because
is.
Now Tommy Docherty died in 2020, and he was still with Mary Brown. And so it sort of feels hard in retrospect to chastise someone for pursuing the love of their life in whatever way they possibly could.
I think the justification, whether it's true or not, and whether it's fair or not, is, like you say, the fact it wasn't the falling in love or anything else. It was the fact that he was sending Laurie Brown to certain places,
which is wrong. But we've all been in love, and we all know that when you are in love, you'll do anything in pursuit of that love.
Yeah, it's a really tricky one. I don't think
love is complicated and often messy.
I don't think it was handled well, because originally, reportedly, Martin Edwards said, well, that happens all the time, don't worry about it, blah, blah, blah.
I bet he said that.
Yeah. And a few weeks later, Docherty's gone, and obviously they went for the polar opposite, Dave Sexton, and that was the end of the great team, really. Gordon Hill.
When you put it like that, when you put it as the polar opposite, it's so insane what we've seen in the post-Fergie era.
Yes.
Like the lack of any coherent strategy. Obviously begins with letting Fergie anoint his own successor, who, if you were to be ungenerous, you would say he knows no way in a million years would usurp him. Because imagine if at that juncture in history, Mourinho breezes in and wins a couple of the European Cups.
Or Guardiola or Klopp.
Yeah.
There were some quite good candidates available at the time.
For someone with the ego that Fergie has, and I say that as a compliment, not as a criticism, like that would be interesting to contemplate. That because if Mourinho turned up, it would suddenly be something very different and not his club anymore. Whereas Moyes, when he told Moyes, he didn't say to Moyes, "Would you like to be United manager?" He said, "You're the new manager of Manchester United." Like that's the power move. That is that's setting up a power relationship. I mean, Foucault would enjoy analysing this. And then Moyes is wearing jeans. I think he says, and the thought of David Moyes in jeans is amusing to me in and of itself. But then Moyes goes home to get changed because he's going to see Fergie. And again, that's like another, like you don't really want to hand the keys over to someone who's going to be grateful for the job in that way. You want to hand the keys to someone who's going to say, yeah, this is mine. And you think about when Fergie got the job. I mean, Fergie would never get the job now because after 10 minutes of success at Aberdeen, he'd probably be at like Birmingham or Sunderland or Villa.
Yes.
He wouldn't have been able to stay long enough to establish himself enough to get the United job. And then to see them swither from Moyes to Van Gaal to Mourinho, just totally different things, as though they learned nothing from McGuinness to O'Farrell. I mean, to the Doc, to Sexton, to Atkinson. Just there's no coherence to that strategy, but no one learned anything.
No. Thing is, it was all there, wasn't it? And everyone spoke at the time, but I've got to learn less about
succession planning, this, that, and even then, they make an absolute pig's arse of it.
If you could get the absolute truth, which you never will, from everyone involved, you could do an amazing drama of the week around Fergie's retirement. Obviously, Moyes getting the job, Mourinho reportedly crying and saying, but he's won nothing, trying to get hold of people who would not, people not returning.
Like Trevor Francis on his birthday when he gets fired.
People not returning his calls and so on. I'd love to know the absolute truth about, did they chat with Guardiola? Did they chat with Klopp? Blah, 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 blah. But I doubt we ever will. Well, in fact, I know we never will.
We definitely. Yeah, I mean, if you got someone said this is a definitive version, who is able to give you that? Would you say, yeah, I can believe you?
Yeah. Yeah, that's an extremely good question.
I imagine most of us in relationships have this all the time. Like, I remember it like this. I remember it like that. Neither of us are lying, but the facts are in dispute.
Yes, we both have our truth.
Yeah, and it's not. Yeah, there is one. There's like my opinion, your opinion, and the truth. And our opinions or our recollections are not the truth unless you have that memory. I can't remember what it's called. There's a kind of memory that enables you to remember absolutely everything. There's a really good 60-minute show about it if you YouTube it, about people who have that it's called specific access memory or something, where literally you remember everything. So your partner can never get into those arguments with you because you rinse them every single time because you can literally remember everything, which is annoying when it comes to things like telephone directories and TV adverts, I believe, and quite mentally demanding.
Yeah, just a bit.
But so I think one of the things, and we sort of touched on it already, where when you think about it going forward, what happens next? Obviously, United fire the Doc and then have some years of misery with Sexton, whereas Liverpool go on to become the best team in the world, although they never actually become world champions, we should add, and they get nailed by Zico when they play Flamengo. But Liverpool go on to become the best team in the world, and they win the European Cup, and then they win it again the next season, and I still can't get my head around it.
What, then winning it back to back?
Yeah, like these players being the best team in the world for two years, but not so much that this team couldn't do it, but that this team are the greatest team of all time. It's the greatest English club side ever, let's say.
Yeah, I could make a case for the 78 team onwards, partly because it's Dalglish, partly because that amazing season they had to retain the league from Forest, regain it rather. But it's difficult, isn't it? I mean, we grew up, obviously, we saw the 87-88 team. I'd probably think of that as the best Liverpool team I've seen, or this one.
But I mean, yeah, we'll come to that when we do the 3-3, I guess. But yeah, that was the first time I saw a Liverpool team and thought, okay, this is they're not just winning, they're actually they're doing the stuff.
Is that partly a perception of style? Because I always think that no one ever talks about France 98 as one of the great international teams. And that's because their attack was a bit of a mess, really. Obviously, they had Guy Varche and they had young players like Henry and Trezeguet, but their defence is arguably the greatest defence ever. So when we say the best team of all time, are we really saying the most stylish and brilliant, or the best attacking team and overall brilliant? I don't know.
I think the thing about France is that they were a really good example, and I think we saw it with Liverpool as well, Klopp's Liverpool team, who they win the biggest trophy and then they become a really good team.
Yes, exactly. Euro 2000 France. Yeah, I agree.
They were much better. Do you remember they came to Wembley just after they win the World Cup, and they win 2-0 and then Anelka scores both goals?
Yeah, they could have scored about 10.
And that was the best performance I'd seen from that France team.
And yet,
much better than anything we saw at the World Cup.
And I agree with you, actually, the Euro 2000 team was so much more rounded, partly because Henry had matured. And yet they were, yes, but they went a lot closer to the edge at Euro 2000 than they did in the World Cup.
Well, they almost got Italy, didn't they?
Yeah. But also, the Spain, remember, Raul missed a last-minute penalty that would have taken them to extra time. Portugal, Bartes made a brilliant save that would have that was a great
game, the Portugal game.
Yeah, it was. So they went a lot closer. But you're right. I still think they had an aura, and France were a brilliant team. But actually, 98 was probably more not comfortable. And I know they were at home and everything. But I just think it's interesting that we often base perceptions of great teams purely on their attacking ability.
Yeah, I mean, I think also they maybe got usurped by Spain because Spain did what they did and then added one, and they sort of felt like the hardest to beat team that I'd ever seen because you couldn't get the ball off them.
Yes.
Although, in a game against that France team, I think that would be a good game. I wouldn't necessarily, because France had an attacker who was good enough to do something with very little of the ball.
Yeah, and also a defence that was good enough to concentrate for 90 minutes.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. I was in Mexico for the Euro 2000 final, and I remember the semi-final. We went to see Tikal. We're in Guatemala. We get to Tikal, these amazing ruins, in the knowledge that it's the France game. It's France-Portugal. And we go thinking we're going to go and spend the whole day at Tikal. We literally go to these amazing ancient ruins, spend about 10 minutes there, and we're like, we've got to get back for this game, don't we? And we then get back to the hostel or whatever for the game. And then for the final, we're in Mexico and can't get a beer in the pub because it's the general election for those 2 days. And because people necessarily get extremely excited about politics in Mexico, they don't allow anyone to buy any booze. And then it's getting into extra time. And then all of a sudden, the telecast to, as Richie Benno might say, just stops. Every channel has to switch onto the election results.
Oh, wow.
And so they just interrupt the game in the middle of extra time to tell us about something far less important than politics. And luckily, we got back in time for the vinegar strokes. But that's just, again, like not something that you think about happening in. But yeah, that is something indeed that happens. Should we look at some correspondence?
Yes, we should indeed. We've had a few emails. Thanks, everyone, for sending them to unitedrewind@gmail.com. So Colm Cotter said, talking about games that we might do in the future, he said, I'd like to suggest a 1984 Cup Winners' Cup semi-final loss to Juventus. A last-minute winner by Paolo Rossi against a pretty injury-ravaged United. The first leg also featured an appearance by Alan Davis, whose life ended in tragic circumstances a few years later. I was a bit too young to fully remember it, but I've watched the YouTube highlights and would love to hear a dissection of the tie on the podcast sometime. I'm sure we'll definitely do that. I mean, that whole
I'd love to do this one.
Yeah, that whole season. We could almost do both games individually or one bumper 12-hour pod on the whole time.
I remember my dad. Well, I don't remember the Barcelona game, but I remember my dad coming into my room, and I guess he wanted some level of consolation to wake me up to tell me that we'd gone out to Juventus. And reading that email reminded me of Bill Buford's book Among the Thugs, where he spends time with United fans going to Juventus. And one particular line that just randomly one of my friends sent me last week saying, and it says, Daft Donald, a fellow of notoriously limited intelligence, he tended to destroy things with chains.
Notoriously limited intelligence is such a great phrase.
And it reminded me of when you, on the Talking Sopranos pod, when Michael Imperioli is talking about the brilliance of the writing, he's always going on about the specificity.
Yes.
That no one's just minding their own business doing nothing, whether they're cutting their toenails or eating a particular kind of food. What they're doing is telling about you. And the specificity here, not that he liked smashing shit up, he tended to destroy things with chains.
Yeah.
So I imagine that as your epitaph.
Yeah.
Tended to destroy things with chains. Daft Donald. What a legend.
That's tremendous. So Tom Black also sent us an email, and he says, I can't be the first to suggest this game, but the Sheffield Wednesday game at Old Trafford in 1993 does hold a special place in my heart. It was my first game at Old Trafford. I was 9 and my dad took me. From my admittedly hazy memory, I was still on the flip-down chair seat for most of the game, straining to see whether Chris Waddle dived at the other end. and then bouncing around the Stretford end for Bruce's first and second, eventually ending up in the arms of a large Irish man with a blotchy red face. At the time, I had no appreciation of the significance of the result. I was barely aware of the season before that, let alone the preceding decade and a half. But in retrospect, I'm not sure even the most grizzled United fan knew that this would set the template for the early Ferguson years and the relentless inevitability of the football to come. And actually, it also set the template for what you were talking about earlier. The culture of late goals starts there, really.
Yeah, I mean, we will cover this game as soon as it's finished. I believe. And then I had a message from Warren Heyman who says, what does he say? He was talking about hot fizzy drinks. And as we talked about whether it would be possible to have a hot drink that was fizzy. Just discussed it in my Zoom networking group. Serious chat. Scientifically not possible due to heat popping the effervescence. Could possibly work in a can, but not a certainty.
So
there we go.
I'll happily try it.
Jono messages and he says, love the Hamburg story at the end of last week's pod. I was living there at the time of this game. It was absolutely freezing over there, so I ended up taking refuge in a fine establishment to celebrate the win all day rather than face a 10-minute walk to the tube. And then we talked a little bit. I asked him if he went to the fish market. The fish market used to be the old fish market in Hamburg, which was where I ended up on that evening, which is open till extremely, extremely late. I remember coming back at 7 a.m. and found a very long-haired type sitting on a park bench outside the hotel we were on, with his face to the bench, shall we say, which seemed like a very good indication of how I found Hamburg to be as a city. And then I got one more from Carlos Sartorial messaged me, and he said, good stuff, although I have to strongly disagree with yours and Rob's assertion that oil money City competitiveness revitalised the derby somehow. That's bollocks. Even when they were dog shit, it was still intense. And actually, what I think about that is, I think that revitalised was maybe the wrong term.
Yeah.
I do think that the derbies did change. The one, like the derby, the cup, I'm sure we'll do the derby semi-final. Like the last games at Main Road were intense. I remember being outside with the Beckham free kick one, and that was extremely intense.
Yeah.
Absolutely no argument there. But I also remember like a lunchtime game where we won 2-0, where Rooney scored twice, that was not intense. There was a game early in the season, and I think 07-08, where we lose 1-0, and that wasn't like that either. Even the game where United basically assert themselves as champions when Ronaldo scores after getting stamped on by Michael Brown wasn't as intense. Michael Ball, sorry. Wasn't as intense as the League Cup semi-final, and as the game where Rashford scores when Van Gaal's the manager. And I wonder if the derby. I mean, the derby always means what it means to the supporters, but I wonder if to the players, especially the more players that you get that aren't from the locale, whether once you're competing for trophies, it does become a little bit different.
Yeah, I think,
and maybe there've been more evening games in recent years as well, which also I think makes a difference.
Yeah, I think it has. So I know they were definitely intense, but there were so many fantastic moments in the 90s and early 2000s. Even that FA Cup game when Neville was sent off, sort of half.
Oh, that was brilliant. Yeah, that was a great game.
Absolutely ferocious game. But look, it's naturally gonna elevate it when City become a challenger. Like first the noisy neighbour stuff, and then obviously now it's the reverse almost, but. I don't know. I completely see his point. You're right. You're right. Revitalised probably isn't quite the correct
word. It was still at a pitch, but it's given it a different wrinkle, shall we say?
Yeah, exactly.
Have we got any more correspondence?
Yes, we've got one more from Ben Poor. He says, I grew up in mid-Wales with a United supporting dad. My first game was a 5-0 win against Leicester in 1980, age 6. We went on the bus with the North Wales Supporters Club. Can't remember much about it apart from the crowd. Watched 1983 Cup final on TV. Can remember my dad picking me up in the air when Ray Wilkins scored his curler. Managed to get to roughly 5-6 games over the next 10 years. Then I applied to all universities in Greater Manchester and Salford Uni, accepted me in 1992. So I started going to the odd games when I could get or afford tickets. Perfect timing. I live right next door to the cliff. Saw McLaren Pallister at Jack the Friar's Chippy after training. Not every day. Lee Sharp at Discotheque Royal. Cantona coming to training.
Royale. Come on.
Oh, God,
Robert.
yes, sorry. I'm reading. Did I say Royal? Lee Sharp at Discotheque Royale. Cantona coming to training in a Ford Fiesta. And I've known Beckham with Keenan Sharp having a few beers on a Monday night in Salford Quays when there wasn't really much there. A young Wes Brown arriving to training on the bus. Me and my brother managed to get 2 season tickets from 96 to 07 when they were gold dust after hearing about a couple who were getting divorced and wouldn't sit next to each other. After that, I moved to Amsterdam, and actually, Rob, you and Faisal Islam used my season tickets for a couple of years for my mate Gwyn Topham. We met once or twice. Yeah, I remember that well, actually. And that's about it. I think you've got any more tweets?
No, those are they.
Great. Well, thank you as always for listening. If you could leave us a review, send a link to United Rewind around your chat groups, or give us a rating on your podcast app. It'd be much appreciated. And if you're new to the show, check out the previous episodes. There's some gems in there. The Norwich game in the first Premier League season, another Liverpool FA Cup Classic, a very important defeat to Real Madrid, and so on and so on.
And if you've got a suggestion for a game we should cover in future, or a great story you'd like to tell us about, email us at unitedrewind@gmail.com or send us a tweet at unitedrewind.
And next week we're going to look back at the Cristiano Ronaldo show at the Emirates in 2008-09, the Champions League semi-final, when he destroyed Arsenal pretty much on his own.
There's no question about that. Well done, Rob.
See up there. Come on, come on, every weekend. Come on,